All right, welcome.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
My name's Ashkahn.
I'm Graham, and we got something to tell you.
Yeah. You're listening to our podcast.
For one of the last daily release times that will come out, yeah.
Yeah, so we're pulling the train into the station here, tying up our horse to that post, and just kind of feeding the dog the bone.
Yeah, we have a we have a whole episode we did recently talking about us winding down the podcast, but our final broadcast is going to be the final podcast broadcast is going to be on November 29th. It's gonna be awesome.
It's gonna be 3:00 PT.
Yep,
it's gonna go till 5:00 PT.
That's paid time for those of you who don't know. If you're living on free time, it's going to be slightly different, but or borrowed time as well.
PT. So come hang out with us. You can ask us questions. We'll answer them. I mean, it'd be
you
just
can
like
answer
this.
questions. People can ask you questions
yeah,
too.
We will ask you questions. You can ask some other person who's calling in questions, and we'll just sit back and listen to you guys have a conversation.
It'll be really fun, though. Join us November 29th, 3 to 5 p.m.
PT.
Yep. Be there. Be Epsom salt. All right. In the meantime, we do have a question to answer today.
Yeah.
As well.
And
which I was going to read out loud to you if you don't have any objections over there.
So hard.
What'd you say?
I said we're going to answer it so hard.
Oh yeah, no, we're totally going to answer it hard. Yeah. Do you know? This is a question, by the way.
Okay.
Do you know of anyone who has successfully accepted insurance as payment? If so, how? Yeah. So sort of.
Yeah.
Is the answer.
Yeah.
There are some people who have gotten insurance money for their customers floating.
And there's lots of different kind of types of insurance or ways to get money from insurance.
Yeah, scams, for example.
Yeah. That one has the highest success rate so far.
Yep. And the longest average time spent in jail as a result.
So there's, let's talk about the United States for a second.
Yeah. The place that we live and know the most about.
Yeah. Yep. So it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
I don't know of anywhere. I don't know of a float center that's really like a dedicated float center that is billing insurance directly. Like people are coming in, they're handing this float center their insurance card. The insurance card is charging them a copay or something, and then sending off some sort of bill to their insurance company, and their insurance company is paying them.
Yep. Nor is there an insurance code for floating. You know, generally the closest that people come is hydrotherapy. Is the code that they end up putting down as some sort of insurance category.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like our government has set up a code for float tanks. They recognize it as something covered by insurance. You can just bill insurance for it. That level of getting it covered by insurance is not there, so as it would be for even massage has.
Right, has things like that. So that's the most extreme. When I think of people thinking, are there float centers taking insurance? That's the most common image I feel like people are thinking of. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum, and I don't personally know of a place in the U.S. where that's happening.
Yeah. So in that sense, no.
So yeah, unless someone out there is freaking rocking it. But,
in which case, let us know. Like, let the world know.
Oh yeah,
we'll
sure.
give you the microphone. You can tell everyone all about it. Yeah, you can keep the microphone. It's awesome news. Yeah, we'll get a new one.
But so then one level back from that is we do know people who are successfully
scamming. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Legally billing insurance companies because they have some other thing that they're offering, therapy or some other like actual thing that is itself being billed by insurance, and they kind of wrap floating into that. Like floating is part of some sort of treatment that they're offering, and that treatment is something that they're able to bill insurance for, and they're kind of floating is getting kind of swept along with it.
So, for instance, we know people who have two-way intercoms inside the float tank, and they are licensed psychologists. And when a customer comes in, they are actually having a therapy session in the float tank. And so the person is getting a float, but they're billing their code for therapy.
So that's like one level down now, and that is happening, but still pretty rarely.
And unless you are a licensed professional who is able to bill insurance under some other practice you're doing, then it's not really an
You
option.
can't just start doing
right.
it. Like, you can't just throw a microphone into your float tank and be like, perfect, like let's get this insurance money.
And if you do that, definitely don't tell people that you heard it here.
So then there's the next level down from that, which is that some people have these insurance plans here in the U.S. where they have these...
It's like the 9 circles of insurance or something.
These like what they call like flex spending accounts or
HSAs?
HSA, whatever that stands for.
Health spending account?
Yeah, something like that, whatever.
Sorry if I got that wrong. I'm just making up words that go along with the acronym.
Homo sapien account.
Spending account, yeah.
So that's where somewhere a float center is not actually dealing with the insurance company themselves, right? So this is someone coming in.
You were using the S in Homo sapien.
That is
the sapien was the S.
That's what I was getting.
Okay,
at.
go on. Sorry,
No, it was nice that we got that clarified.
Yeah.
It was bothering me that
it was a better joke too.
So if you guys have other questions, just go.
Okay, no, so flex spending HSAs.
So that's where the float center is not dealing with the insurance company. The floater's coming in, they're paying for the float, and then that person, the person who got the float, the customer, goes to their insurance and says, "Hey, I want to use part of my FSA/HSA, whichever one I have, to pay for this," and they get reimbursed by the insurance company. Maybe.
Yeah, and that. I mean, I've heard of people getting denied for that, and I've heard of it getting accepted.
And
too,
we've had people get accepted with that at our place.
Yeah.
And we've also had people get references over the float. Like a chiropractor will write actually a reference for one of their patients to come float. And that floater will then take that reference and send it along with their request to be reimbursed. And that's like helped them get reimbursed.
Yeah, so that's a really legit option. And it doesn't seem from the outside like there's a system that will just make it so you can get your float accepted. It almost, and we say this for a lot of things, but it almost depends on just the person who's on the other end of that email or letter that you're sending and what they ate for lunch and like how angry they are at their kids that day. And yeah, it seems like it's a part of a review process almost. And someone is getting these appeals and then judging whether or not they'll actually be valid for distributing funds. So again, it's not surefire, but without knowing any kind of stats on it, I'm just going to say it seems like 50-50 or, from the outside.
And so there's a pretty big difference from the float center owner's perspective between that and the level above it, right?
Yeah.
Because like when we're doing that, like we're not really doing anything. We're just kind of like the person's coming, they're paying us, we have the money, and then we're just like, good luck, hope this works out for you. And in the other end of the spectrum, like you're billing insurance as a company, which I'm sure is insanely complicated and has all sorts of crazy stuff you have to figure out. To the point that, when this topic has come up in different industry meetings or, it was like the Rise Float Gathering a couple years ago, this whole topic came up and it got into a pretty big discussion because there's people in the float industry who've done this before, who've lived this world.
Being chiropractors and
something and have billed insurance and say that it's horrible. And like, we're basically being like, we don't want to, like, do not think that this is going to magically like make all our lives easier. Like there's a whole world of pain that comes with being a company that bills insurance.
Yeah, or being an industry in general that bills insurance, I guess. Because even if you don't, now you're competing with people who do offer lower rates for people who have insurance.
Which I guess makes sense. Insurance seems extremely complicated and rife with all sorts of insanity. So,
and I don't feel like I know enough to have an opinion on that. Like whether or not our industry should be insured. Like I know just enough to know that it's not as easy as saying, "Oh, absolutely, why wouldn't we?"
Yeah.
I know that there is another side to the story where, things can get messy. Now you have overhead you need to spend in actually billing insurance. They want to pay you less than often what your retail price is, so your price per float can drop.
Or they determine prices after the fact that you've already collected some amount from people, or
just all kinds of confusion.
Yeah.
And
we have health insurance, and I've been very angry at them personally, being like, no, what you're saying doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I understand how this could be complicated and frustrating. Okay.
Yeah.
So then there's some stuff to bring up outside the U.S.
Yeah.
Which is that still I don't actually know of anywhere that float centers are billing insurance as like primarily float businesses, directly billing for floating.
I've just heard little like rumors here and there, and I haven't verified any of them. Like just recently someone was saying that Ottawa up in Canada was able to bill
Really?
more directly for insurance. But again, this is unverified. I'm not even saying that. I'm saying this as a rumor right here. Like, I'm the rumor mill right now.
Yeah, so tell it to enough people and maybe it'll just start happening.
But if you, I mean, honestly though, if you are a center in another country and you are actively able to just bill insurance, you're not collecting any money from your customers. You're just getting money from the insurance company. Write in and let us know how that's working. And if you actually have a designated code, it would be really interesting to get an international perspective on how it's going from someone who's actually working with the system.
For sure. What we do know is, so other countries have these things called, national government provided healthcare, which is
sensible morals. Yeah,
it's not a thing we experience here in the United States, but in other countries, if you're trying to like play this game of getting floating covered by insurance, you're like, well, we have one goal, which is to get the national health insurance to accept floating. Whereas here in the U.S., it's like, who even knows what the product like. You have to convince giant insurance companies, and they hopefully will convince the other insurance companies to also cover floating. And
getting a code delineated in the first place.
Yeah. So there's a little bit more of a kind of direct, path, I think, in other countries towards achieving this. And what we saw was some years ago, Sweden had really set up like a plan to make this happen. So they had a float association that formed, and that association's kind of primary goal was to get floating covered by health insurance, the national health insurance there. And, to them, there was very clear steps to take to accomplish that, which was generating research to be able to have empirical data to support floating. That was like step one, which is why we see a bunch of Swedish float research that came out, some years ago, and it is continuing to come out. Step two was to establish a kind of certified training program for float center operators. And from there, I think once they had those things established, they could approach the government and work on getting it actually approved.
Yeah, and then profit,
Yeah, done. People in hammocks sitting on the beach. But unfortunately, things kind of fell apart a little bit there. Not really because the government refused to accept this as something that could be covered by insurance, but just kind of the association hit whatever, something happened, and it kind of fell apart, and I don't think it's really active anymore. And they got all the way to the point of basically forming this certification program, like putting the training together and building an online course. But last I checked, which was a couple of years ago, it didn't really go any further than that. And kind of the same thing in Canada. I don't think Canada really got quite as far, but the Float Collective started as a group up there in Canada with one of their main goals to get floating covered by Canadian health insurance. And same thing. It was, when they were even first talking about it, they were like, oh, this is like a 10-year project to be able to do all this. And same sort of thing. I think it's just, the scope of work to do something like that is probably a little bit bigger than where we're at as an industry right now is my guess a big factor.
Yeah, for sure. So, them's the sticks for right now, I will say that the fact that research continues to be funded and keeps being furthered, and that this is showing actual benefit for clinical populations, for people suffering with chronic anxiety, with any manner of physical ailments, and those are actually being researched as well, is a really good sign for it leading towards that path of being able to be covered by insurance more. And even with the flex spending accounts and submitting, the more research there is out there that's peer reviewed, and with this new NIH grant coming out of Justin Feinstein's lab, the more funded government research essentially that's coming out will be really cool to be able to send in as kind of proof that yes, you should just send me back a reimbursement at the very least,
Yeah, that definitely feels like a big step in the process.
So that's what we know.
We'll see. We'll see what happens.
See what happens.
Yeah.
And if you have your own questions, which there's only a few left, so really, if you have your own questions, go and submit them soon. Go to
floattanksolutions.com/podcast.
Woo! Talk to you tomorrow.
Bye.